Hello, welcome to my Computer Science 2 class. In this class, we're going to be learning the techniques of object-oriented programming in Java. We'll be using BlueJ integrated development environment and then the Greenfoot development environment. So the first thing I need you to do is to download and install the BlueJ application. BlueJ can be run on Windows, Macintosh, and Linux devices. Simply use a search engine for Blue and the letter J, and when you find it, download and install following the instructions. Okay, now that you've got BlueJ installed, let's open it up. Once BlueJ is open, I want you to select a new project. I currently have an old project that I was working on for a different computer science class, and it's going to ask us where to save our project. And we want to keep things really well organized. You can use the documents section of your computer, but wherever you choose to save it, you need to have folders that organize your work. So I'm going to be just in the regular document section of this computer, and I'm going to create a new folder called Computer Science 2. If I double click on that, I can create another new folder within it called Unit 1, since we're going to have several different things that we'll be doing. And I'll select that folder. Now we need to name the project. The project could have lots of different classes in it, but our first project name, let's just call it People. We're going to use a lowercase letter when we name projects, and we'll use capital letters when we create new files, which will be called classes. Okay, so here we have the BlueJ environment. In the bottom right-hand corner, we have the interactive shell that allows us to practice our Java code and see results immediately. In the left-hand corner, we have the workbench that allows us to interact with things that we created with our code. We can enlarge the workbench or open and reopen up the shell. As you can see, we can minimize the shell and open it. We do have some options that we can find under tools for preferences. But I'm going to pretty much keep these the same. I might increase my font size just a little bit to make it a little bit easier to view on the camera. Okay, that being said, let's get started on our first Java class. Java is an object-oriented programming language. So we need to start thinking entirely in terms of objects. So the first thing I want us to do is to represent ourselves as an object. So let's click on New Class. And I want you to make a class that can describe you. So let's call the class Student. And you have all these different options, and this just determines the pre-made code that will be made for you. Our language will be Java. And there it is. We can click on it, and there's some example code that will appear, but I don't want any of that, so I'm just going to hit the Control-A button to highlight everything and hit delete. When we think about objects, objects can contain information and they can perform tasks. They have what are called states and behaviors. So what I want to do now is I want to make an object that can store information. So we do that in a class. Everything needs to be inside a class in Java. So I'm going to call this class Student. Notice that the class name has to match the name of the file. If I use a different class name, then I have to change the file name. So for example, if I made this student X, you'll notice the file name and the file here immediately change to match it. but we'll just leave it student. But they have to be the same. Okay, after the word student, I have put the curly brace that you'll become so familiar with. Shift, and then it's the button above the quote, and then I go ahead and make an immediate other one right below it. Because for every open curly brace, you have to have a closing one. Okay, if we hit enter, BlueJ should automatically indent for us, making our code nice and readable. All right, so we need to think about things that our student can have as information. So when I think about a student, I think about they have an age or a grade level, and they can have a name. Let's store just their grade and their name. So with Java, everything has to be what is called strongly typed. So when we make a variable to hold information about a student, we need to tell Java what kind of information that is. In other words, is it a number, is it a word, or some other kind of type of information? The grade levels that we'll be using for our student will be whole numbers. They won't be decimal or real numbers. So we're going to be using what we call integers. And we can use the abbreviated just int, int, short for integer. So we are declaring that we are going to store some information of type int. We now need to give it a variable name. The variable name is going to be grade level. Notice that grade level is 2 words, but we need to make it only 1 word when we make a variable name. The tradition when programming in Java is to use camel case. So the first letter is lowercase, but the first letter of each second word becomes capitalized. That's why the L is capital. When making a statement in Java, you have to end each statement with a semicolon. The semicolon indicates that I am done with this line of this command. So this particular statement is me simply declaring that the student object will have a grade level. The next thing I want to store is the name of the student. The name of the student is a word. It's got characters. Words and characters are stored in what's called a string. So we are going to declare that this next variable is called as of type string, and that will be the name. Okay, so you might notice something a little different here. The int declaration that we made for the grade level has a lowercase I. The name variable is a string, and string starts with a capital S. Most variable types in Java are capital letters because they are made from a class themselves. There are a few that we will use that are lowercase, and those are called primitives. So when you have a variable type that is a lowercase, then you know it's much more basic. A person's name has lots of different letters, with each one a different code that they're stored in. So it's more complex, and it's stored in an object called a string. A grade level is just a number. It's stored in a primitive called an int. Okay, next thing we need to do is we need to make a special method that will fill those variables with the values that our student has. And that method is called a constructor. The purpose of the constructor is to construct the object. And the constructor will begin with the same word that we named the class. So the name of the class is student. The constructor will be a student. But because it is a special method, it will have an open and closed parentheses after the word student. Okay, so after the opening and closing parentheses, I put another curly brace and then put a closing curly brace. After hitting enter, it should indent for me. Here's where we get to state these different grade levels. Now, I've already graduated school, of course, but I'm going to put myself in 10th grade. And now I'm going to put my name. Anytime you put a word in Java, you need to put it in quotes. That indicates that it's a string. And my name is Jed Wilshire. Notice again, I'm putting semicolons after each one of these statements. All right, let's compile our class. So compiling is the process of taking what is a relatively readable set of code that has English words, and we're translating it into commands that a computer can understand. Original languages that were compiled would be compiled all the way down into what's called machine code, which is a series of ones and zeros that can be understood by the processor. Java is kind of an in-between. It's compiled down to something similar to machine code, but it's more easily readable to a computer than these words, but it's not quite all the way down to the ones and zeros. All right, let's go ahead and explore our new class. So we can close this class or just click over here. In order to make an object in BlueJ, we're going to right-click on the class. And you'll notice that we have several different options here in red. These are simply things for our editing. So we can open it in the editor, compile again, we can inspect it, all sorts of things like that, or even delete. But the commands we can actually do are up here at the top, and you'll notice it says new student. We can make a new student. Now I need to make a name for this instance. Whenever you create an object from a class, it's called an instance of the class, and it needs a variable name. So I'll just call it student1. That's fine. It appears down here on my workbench. Let's investigate it. I'm going to click on inspect. You'll notice that our object was able to store two pieces of information, my grade level and my name. And that's pretty much it. Okay, let's make it a little bit better. Currently, though, we can only make one type of student. We can make a student with the grade level 10 and a name of Jed Wilshire, or whatever you put in. Let's make it to where our student class can make any kind of student who had any grade level with any name. And we're going to do that by adding variables to the constructor's parameters. So here, I'm going to enter in some variables. Just like before, we need to type them. So I'm going to say int, and I need to think of a variable name that reminds me of grade level, but I don't want to use grade level because I've already used it up here. So I could say something like GL, or even just G. Then I will put string and maybe put an in for name. There's lots of different ways people do this. One popular way is to put an underscore in front of the same variable name. And I will use that from time to time, but for now, I'll just stick with GL. So now I go to the grade level and I type in GL right here. And I put an in right here. It's super important that you understand how this is working. So when a user of our class tries to make an instance, they're going to be asked for a GL and an in. When they type in their number for the grade level, it will go right here in that variable. It gets caught by this GL parameter. We call it a parameter when we write the constructor, but when the user is actually making the object, you call that the argument. But they're basically the same thing. Then here we have an in that captures their name. So what the user typed in is then put here, and this equal sign will assign it to the grade level variable. And the in gets assigned to the name variable. So that student now has a grade level and a name of what they put. Let's compile and try it out. All right, I'm going to put grade level 6, and the name needs to be in quotes Harry Potter. Okay, now I can inspect, and you see the grade and name. Now I'm going to add another one. Let's do grade level 12, and I'll put Sally mixed student. All right, so now notice that my student 2 has a different grade level and a different name than my student 1. Because they're different objects, different instances of the student class. Our object is able to hold and store this information. What I would like for you to do right now is to add another variable that will store the favorite color of the student. Think about what kind of data type that would be. Would it be a string or would it be an int? Allow the constructor to hold that value, receive it from the users of our class, and then use the constructor to store it. Pause the video while you edit the student class. Then, when you're done, unpause the video and we'll go over our answers. Okay, let's see how you did. Since a color like blue or lavender or purple or red are words, I hope you chose string. Now, what variable name you give it is totally up to you. I'm going to call it fav color. Maybe you called it FC, our favorite color. Whatever it is, it needs to be one word, and try and stick to the Java convention of using camel case. So now we need to have a way to set it. So I'm going to add a third item in my constructor of type string called FC, and that's going to catch what the user sends me as information. And now I will do fav color equals FC. And I'll compile and test it out. All right, I'm going to make this student 5, Charlie Brown, whose favorite color is yellow. Maybe it's brown, I don't know. Okay, let's see if we were able to store all that information by inspecting it. You can also simply double click on your object to inspect it. All right, looks great. So hopefully you had success adding the ability to store a favorite color. The next thing I want to do is practice making another class that will describe another object that we encounter in the world. But I also want to take this opportunity while we're practicing making classes to introduce 2 more ways we can store information. So let's check it out. I want to make a class to represent a pencil. So I'm going to title the class Pencil. Notice the capital P. And let's edit it. Once again, Control A or use your mouse to highlight everything. And let's just delete it. There's a lot of example code. You're welcome to peruse it to try and learn something. But I'm just going to start with a clean slate. Okay, so first, we have to declare that this is a class of type pencil. Then we make the curly brace. And I'm going to go ahead and make a closing one before I forget. And then I'll tab over. Now, we need to think of what characteristics we need to have for our pencil so that we can describe this pencil in the real world. To help us think about that, I have a pencil. Now, this pencil might be quite different than a pencil that you have around you right now. My pencil here is yellow, has an eraser, it has a certain length, and this one is dull. It's not sharpened. So we need to find variable types that can store that kind of information that makes each pencil unique. So first of all, I have a length to this pencil. Now, if I was to measure the length of this pencil, I might have to have centimeters, and those centimeters would have to be broken up into parts of a centimeter. For example, this pencil could be 8.3 centimeters long, or 7.25 centimeters long. It's unlikely that this pencil is exactly 8 or 7. So I don't want to use an integer data type that can only be whole numbers. I want to be able to store real number values, numbers with whole parts and fractional parts, decimal numbers. So in Java, that data type is called a double, for double precision. You may be familiar with the float as a type of number. In Java, we typically use the double, and I'm going to call that length. The color of my pencil, I think I'm going to use as a string. But there's one more thing about this pencil, and that this pencil is not very useful yet, is that it is dull. It's not sharp. So a pencil is either going to be sharp or it's not sharp. So it's either true that it's sharp or it's false. That data type that stores whether something is true or false is called a boolean, for the mathematician George Boole. So we have boolean, and I'm going to say is sharp. I love to name my booleans with words that begin with stuff like is, so that you can see in the name that it must be a true or false. Is sharp is either true, or is sharp is false. Notice that, again, the primitives are in red because they're special words in Java, so they have been highlighted for us. Also note that both the boolean and the double are primitives and have the lowercase first letter. But a string, a word, is much more complicated. It's an object. Okay, now it's time to write our constructor. So we start with the name of the class. Let me give myself a little bit of space. And then we use parentheses to catch the parameters that someone sends us. So if I don't put anything in the parentheses, then my user doesn't get to make any customizations. And that's exactly what I'm going to do to start with. So I want my length to be 7.5. I want my color to be yellow. And I want my is sharp to be false. This is what I call a default pencil. I'm going to make a note about that using a comment. A comment is something that only the coder gets to see. It will not affect the way the program is made. And in Java, we make the comments by making 2 slashes, which is the same button as the question mark. That's one of a couple different types of comments that we'll learn. So I'm going to call this the default constructor. It makes a default pencil. But I also want to let my users of my class make a different kind of pencil. So I can just make another constructor. And as long as it has a different amount of parameters in the parentheses, there's no confusion that Java will allow me to do it. If I try and make a constructor with the same parameters, then Java will get confused and we'll have problems. So I'm going to let this constructor to make a custom pencil. And there we go. Again, we just want to use variable names that remind us of these. And I'll say length equals len. Color get C. Remember, each one of the assignments is from right to left. Be very careful that you are storing this parameter into the variables we declared at the top. These parameters are temporary variables. They do not exist after this curly brace that ends this constructor. So if you try and store them in the wrong direction, they won't last. We have to take those temporary values and assign them to the permanent values that we've declared here. Okay, it compiles. Good. Now, let's test it out. Let's right-click on the pencil class, and now notice we have two options. There's our default pencil, and there's our custom pencil constructor. Let's make a default. Let's make another one. This one here, I'm going to make 5.5. You make it whatever length you want. I'm going to make it red, and I definitely want this pencil to be sharp. So I will type in the word true. If I wanted it to not be sharp, I would type in the word false. Notice it's not in quotes. The true and false are special values, not words. Also, take note that true and false in Java begin with lowercase letters, unlike they did with, say, Python or some other programming languages. All right, let's inspect them. This pencil is 7.5, yellow, and it is not sharp. Notice the lowercase f. This pencil is 5.5, red, and it's true. Okay, that's our introduction to making classes to store information. The last topic we need to touch on in this lesson is how to find your code in your computer. For a Windows computer, we can open up the File Explorer window. Now I saved my code under Documents. You may have saved yours somewhere else. And I made it Computer Science 2 folder and a Unit 1 folder. And there's my project name. When I open it though, you see there's quite a bit of information here. When you're turning in assignments to me, you're going to only send me the Java file. And that can be difficult for some people to find. When you navigate to your folder with the project name, you may want to change your view. Perhaps your view looks like this, and these icons might look different than mine. Or perhaps they're in a list. But if you view the details, it's a lot easier. You can also find that usually you can go to Properties if you right-click on a file name and make sure that it says .java. That's the file that I want you to send me, because that's the one that's readable to me as a human. I can load it, but I can also read the code, and that's what's really important. I don't need the entire package, I just need the file from the class that you've been asked to make. Sometimes you'll have to turn in multiple classes in your Google Classroom, and you can simply select and add each one of them to your assignment one at a time. So until our next lesson, have a great day and enjoy coding.